Fermenting civilization, the drink that built us. Few people realize this, but one of the earliest motivations for humanity to abandon the nomadic life wasn't survival, it was intoxication. Yes, alcohol. That strange, burning liquid. The nectar of celebration. The medicine of grief. The quiet companion to our loneliest nights. It may sound absurd at first, that beer or wine could have catalyzed the birth of civilization, but archaeological evidence says otherwise. Long before cities, long before writing, long before organized religion, humans began fermenting. Fermented drinks, crude versions of what we now call beer and wine, were among the first complex recipes our ancestors ever developed. And in the process, they unknowingly began to settle. Farming grains, domesticating fruit-bearing trees, and gathering honey not just for food, but for the drink. Because fermented drinks were more than refreshment. They were sacred, magical, a ticket to something else, something beyond the mundane routines of survival. From Mesopotamia to ancient China, from Mesoamerica to the Nile Valley, archaeological digs have uncovered ancient pots and containers with chemical residues, all pointing to one thing. Humanity was brewing. And not just casually. Fermentation became ritualized, socialized. It was tied to harvest festivals, spiritual ceremonies, rites of passage, and even diplomacy. The Sumerians had gods of beer. The Egyptians buried jars of wine with their dead. The Chinese, as early as 7000 BCE, were mixing rice, honey, and fruits to produce alcoholic concoctions we might now recognize as wine. In a strange way, alcohol was the first substance that allowed us to alter reality, not by force, but by chemistry. It softened the harshness of life. It made us feel elevated. Before we go further down this philosophical rabbit hole, let's step back and understand the science. What exactly is happening in the brain when we drink? Alcohol, specifically ethanol, is the byproduct of yeast digesting sugar. And when we consume it, it doesn't just sit in our stomach. It travels rapidly. Within 20 to 30 minutes, alcohol is absorbed through our digestive system, 20% in the stomach, 80% in the small intestine, and enters the bloodstream. From there, it circulates to the brain. And that's where things get strange. Ethanol doesn't just relax us. It interferes, quietly and thoroughly, with how our brain communicates. Specifically, it disrupts neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers responsible for thought, memory, emotion, and coordination. One of the key players in this process is a chemical called acetaldehyde, produced when ethanol is broken down. It's highly reactive, and it affects everything from dopamine, pleasure, to GABA, inhibition, to glutamate, cognition. The result? Slurred speech, slower reaction times, impaired memory, heightened emotion, altered perception, but most importantly, a feeling of detachment, a brief moment where we're not entirely here, where the brain loosens its grip on reality, and something else, something softer, hazier, takes over. Not just for humans. It's not just us. Across the animal kingdom, species have been observed seeking out naturally fermented fruits and indulging. In the savannas of southern Africa, elephants are drawn to marula fruit, which ferments under the sun. The result? Staggering, slightly aggressive, visibly inebriated elephants. Monkeys on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts have been caught stealing cocktails from tourists, choosing them over soft drinks or juice. Their preference is obvious and relatable. Even rodents, birds, and marsupials show a clear tendency toward overripe, fermented fruit, and often behave strangely afterward. So maybe the love of altered states is not uniquely human. Maybe it's something older, something buried deep within the evolutionary impulse to escape pain, or to feel joy, or just to feel something different. Sake, the ancient art of brewing. The earliest forms of alcohol were, by today's standards, mild and unpredictable. Without industrial control, most ancient brews had relatively low alcohol content, often below 13%, because the yeast would die off beyond that threshold. Still, fermentation became a seasonal art. After harvests, leftover grains or fruits would be brewed and stored, not just to avoid waste, but as a kind of preservation, a way to keep summer's abundance alive through the winter. In ancient Mesopotamia, laws were even created around alcohol. The Code of Hammurabi, dating back to 1750 BCE, included regulations on taverns. A dishonest bartender, One who shorted customers or watered down drinks could face severe punishment, including death by drowning. Clearly, alcohol wasn't just tolerated. It was respected, regulated, feared. It carried power, and with it, responsibility. That's the foundation. A strange, beautiful truth. The drink that fogs our minds may have helped crystallize the very foundations of human culture. In the next part, we'll explore how alcohol shaped the rise of empires, became currency, traveled with conquerors, and even sparked revolutions, both social and spiritual. But before we move on, consider this. What if the urge to drink wasn't about escapism at all? What if it was a search for transcendence, for meaning, for a moment of unity with something bigger? As fermentation techniques evolved, so did our relationship with alcohol. What began as seasonal brews and sacred rituals slowly transformed into global trade, state economies, and even tools of empire. By the 10th century, a major breakthrough arrived from the heart of the Middle East: distillation. Unlike fermentation, which is biologically limited, distillation was chemistry. It allowed humans to separate ethanol from water, and with it, to concentrate intoxication. The result? Liquor, spirits, man. With higher alcohol content and longer shelf life, distilled drinks could travel. They became commodities, portable, storable, valuable. Yet ironically, this innovation came from a region that would later reject it. As Islamic influence spread across the Middle East, alcohol was gradually outlawed. What began as a scientific and cultural contribution faded from local use, even as it changed the world elsewhere. Europe, especially, embraced distillation with fervor. Spirits like brandy, gin, and eventually whiskey and rum became more than drinks. They became currency. Globe showing Europe, Africa, alcohol, and empire. In the age of exploration, ships crossed oceans in search of spice, silk, silver, and everywhere they went, alcohol followed. European powers used spirits like a second language. Brandy was traded for slaves, gin for ivory, rum for sugar. It wasn't just a drink. It was an instrument of negotiation, manipulation, and control. Even pirates, like the iconic Jack Sparrow, weren't just caricatures with a bottle. Their love for rum had historical roots. Rum was born from sugarcane, abundant in the Caribbean. Cheap, strong, and long-lasting, it was ideal for long sea voyages. Water spoiled. Rum didn't. So they mixed the two, partly to purify, partly to pacify. And that's the strange paradox. Alcohol made life bearable, even in unbearable times. On slave ships, warships, merchant vessels, a swig of spirits dulled pain, silence, and memory. The same drink that connected us to gods now tethered us to commerce and to colonialism. Ice cube from sacred to industrial. With the Industrial Revolution, everything changed. Brewing and distillation, once artful and intimate, became industrialized. Companies like Carlsberg, Asahi, and Anheuser-Busch didn't just make drinks. They engineered them. Refrigeration, controlled fermentation, and scientific precision turned alcohol into an efficient, scalable product. It had to be consistent. It had to be affordable. And above all, it had to be repeatable. That's why beer today hovers around 5% alcohol. Wine, around 12%. These numbers weren't chosen randomly. They were calculated. The perfect balance of buzz and control. Drink too little, and you'll want more. Drink too much, and you won't return. But hit the sweet spot, and you'll come back tomorrow. And the next day, brain the business of pleasure. Let's be blunt. Alcohol is now an industry built around predictable euphoria. Every can, bottle, and brand is designed not just to intoxicate, but to entice. Packaging, marketing, even the glass you pour into, all of it whispers, "This will make life better." But here's the truth. Alcohol isn't a stimulant. It's a depressant. It doesn't activate pleasure centers directly. Instead, it suppresses parts of the brain, loosening inhibition, blurring logic, numbing fear. In moderation, it feels like flying. In excess, it becomes sedation. And over time, it quietly reshapes the brain's reward system. That's why we don't all react the same. Some people become joyful, others melancholic. Some confident, others violent. Because alcohol doesn't create new emotions. It amplifies what's already inside. Scroll when culture meets chemistry. In cultures around the world, alcohol carries different meanings. In Vietnam, drinking isn't just a pastime. It's a ritual of trust. Deals are made. Secrets are shared. Relationships tested, all at the bottom of a glass. In Japan, sake is offered to gods at Shinto shrines. In Greece, wine was a gift from Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and madness. And in literature, oh, how alcohol flows. Hemingway drank to make life more interesting. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote, "First you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes you." It's almost poetic, the way writers, artists, and thinkers return to the bottle, not just for relief, but for inspiration. Because intoxication, in its best moments, can feel like connection to beauty, to truth, to something ineffable just beyond our reach. Wilted flower, a double-edged elixir. But we must ask, at what cost? Liver damage, memory loss, dependency, emotional volatility. These aren't footnotes. They're consequences. Because the same chemical that softens fear also erodes control. And what begins as a sip of freedom can become a lifetime of chains. Yet we keep drinking. Not because we're ignorant, but because we remember the moments of magic. The laughter, the confessions, the tears we couldn't cry sober, the night we danced like gods, the morning we felt like ash. Alcohol is not just a chemical. It's a mirror. Sometimes it shows us who we could be. Sometimes it reminds us of what we've lost, the high within, why we really drink. Why do we drink? Is it the taste? The warmth? The permission to feel things we usually suppress? Let's be honest. For many of us, drinking is not about celebration. It's about permission. To loosen up. To speak freely. To love boldly. To cry without shame. To feel without filter. The first few glasses are magical. They lower the veil between who we are and who we want to be. That's the seduction of alcohol, not in what it adds, but what it removes. It removes fear. It removes hesitation. It removes the self-conscious voice in your head that whispers, "Don't say that. Don't do that. They'll judge you." And for a moment, in the glow of a dim room, you feel alive. Not controlled, not edited, not professional or responsible or strategic. Just human, just raw. Brain, the chemistry of escape. Neurologically, we've already explored how alcohol is absorbed, processed, and eventually excreted. But what happens in between, in the space where we feel drunk, is a kind of biochemical theater. Your brain, under the influence, undergoes what can only be described as a temporary rewiring. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment and impulse control, becomes sluggish. That's why you speak faster than you think. Why ideas seem brilliant at 1 a.m. Why a stranger feels like a soulmate. The hippocampus, tied to memory, begins to slip. Conversations blur. Time bends. Logic floats away. This is why alcohol is so tightly bound to nostalgia. We don't remember the details, just the feeling. And the limbic system, where emotions live, becomes louder. You're not just happy. You're euphoric. You're not just sad. You're shattered. You're not just angry. You're explosive. Every emotional dial gets turned up, not by choice, but by chemistry. Sparkles drinking to feel, not forget. You've probably heard people say, "I drink to forget." But most people don't. They drink to feel. To feel something in a life that's often automated, overstimulated, or numb. They drink to access emotions they can't articulate at work. To laugh without restraint. To grieve without armor. To be seen, not as a role or a resume, but as a person. That's why alcohol has survived every prohibition, every religion, every war. Because it offers a shortcut to something we crave: connection. Connection with others. Connection with our past. Connection with a version of ourselves that isn't bound by fear. Even poets, artists, and philosophers throughout history have spoken of alcohol not as a drug, but as a bridge. Charles Bukowski once wrote, "Drinking is an emotional thing. It joggles you out of the standardism of everyday life." Clinking beer mugs, the social contract of drinking. Drinking, in many cultures, is not just accepted, it's expected. We toast at weddings. We share drinks at funerals. We pour shots at promotions. We down beers when hearts break. There's a strange, unspoken rule in society. If someone drinks with you, they trust you. If someone drinks with you, they're offering honesty, even if it's messy or broken or loud. In places like Vietnam, Japan, Korea, refusing a drink can feel like refusing friendship. Because it's not about the alcohol. It's about what it represents: vulnerability. In a world that demands composure, Alcohol offers a rare opportunity to drop the mask, to say what we really think, to confess what we really feel, to ask quietly, "Are you hurting too?" Balance scale the thin line between freedom and addiction. But here's the danger. The very thing that makes alcohol powerful is what makes it dangerous. It becomes too easy to rely on, to reach for after work, to need before parties, to crave when the silence becomes unbearable. That's the slippery slope. When alcohol becomes not a ritual, but a routine, not a conductor of the soul, but a replacement for it. And here lies the tragedy. You start drinking to remember who you are, but over time, you forget. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You stop showing up to things you once loved. You stop listening. You stop feeling deeply, unless it's in a haze. The high becomes hollow. The conversations become loops. And the person in the mirror becomes a stranger with a hangover. Magnifying glass tilted left, so why do we keep doing it? Because despite everything, despite the risks, despite the regrets, there's still something beautiful about a drink shared between friends. About a story told with blurry eyes and loud laughter. About the quiet, profound feeling of knowing, even if just for a night, you were fully alive. Not perfect, not polished, but real. When you hold a glass of wine, you're not just holding a drink. You're holding history. You're holding the echo of the first clay pots buried in Neolithic soil. You're holding the residue of human curiosity, the question, what happens if we leave this juice out under the sun? Alcohol wasn't discovered accidentally. It was pursued, repeated, cultivated. Why? Because it offered something we couldn't find in raw survival. It offered ritual. It offered transcendence. It offered transformation, not just of fruit into wine, but of human into something more. It turned silence into storytelling. It turned isolation into community. It turned chaos into a kind of sacred order, if only for an evening. Amphora from the fire to the feast. Anthropologists now believe that fermented beverages played a major role in shifting humans from nomadic tribes to settled agricultural societies. Yes, we started farming not just for food, but for drink. Barley, grapes, rice, the foundations of beer, wine, and spirits, were among the first crops cultivated. Because people weren't just hungry, they were thirsty for meaning. And what better way to create that meaning than to share in something that changes the body and opens the soul? Ancient Sumerians sang hymns to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Egyptians placed jugs of wine in their tombs for the afterlife. In Greece and Rome, banquets weren't complete without philosophical debates over several cups of wine. These weren't just meals. They were ceremonies of transformation, where ideas fermented as richly as the drink itself. Moneybag economy, empire, and intoxication. Alcohol built economies. In medieval Europe, monasteries became breweries. In the Caribbean, sugar became rum, and rum became currency. During colonization, gin and brandy traveled farther than armies, sometimes starting wars, sometimes ending them. Even Jack Sparrow, the fictional pirate, clung to his bottle of rum like it was a compass. Because, in a way, it was a compass pointing to comfort, to memory, to identity. In America, Prohibition taught us a strange lesson. You can ban the bottle, but not the thirst. Because alcohol, by then, had become woven into culture. It wasn't just about flavor or escape. It was about belonging. Prayer beads, spiritual elixirs, and sacred highs. In many traditions, alcohol was, and still is, sacred. In Christianity, wine symbolizes the blood of Christ. In Shinto, sake is used to communicate with the gods. In Andean rituals, fermented chicha is offered to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Even in Islam, where alcohol is forbidden, the imagery of wine, the intoxication of divine love, appears in Sufi poetry. I drank the wine of divine love and lost the way to myself. This shows that even when the bottle is banned, the metaphor remains. Because alcohol isn't always about the drink. Sometimes it's about what the drink represents. Ecstasy, surrender, dissolution of ego. Performing arts, the theater of identity. When people drink, they don't just feel different, they often become someone else. The shy become loud. The rigid become free. The heartbroken become poets. But are they pretending or finally telling the truth? Some say alcohol brings out the worst in people. Others say it reveals their truest self. Maybe it does both. Maybe the self is not one thing, but many, and alcohol is simply the spotlight on whichever part steps forward. But every performance has a cost. The longer you stay in character, the harder it is to return backstage. Some people forget who they were before the drink. Some don't want to remember, because the drink is easier. The drink doesn't judge. The drink doesn't care if you cry. The drink doesn't ask if you're healing. It just holds space for you to feel. Ultimately, alcohol is neither good nor evil. It's a mirror. It reflects the culture that drinks it. It reflects the person who pours it. It reflects the world we want to escape or embrace. It can be medicine. It can be poison. It can connect people or push them apart. It can bring joy or reveal pain. But the one thing it never is neutral. Because what we do when we're drunk, the calls we make, the words we say, the secrets we confess, they come from somewhere real. And if we're lucky, we remember not just the taste of the drink, but the truths it helped us touch. Let's face it. For all its poetry, all its ritual, all its sacred history, alcohol is also a biological hack. It taps into your nervous system. It alters your neurochemistry. It loosens the boundaries of self, but it also damages the machinery that holds you together. The science is clear. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. It suppresses activity in your brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning, judgment, and inhibition. That's why, after a few drinks, things feel lighter. You're not overthinking. You're not filtering. You're not carrying the weight of your own conscience. But what we call freedom in that moment might just be a temporary neural shutdown. Brain, what happens inside your brain? Here's what's happening under the hood. After you drink, ethanol is absorbed into the bloodstream through your stomach and small intestine. It then crosses the blood-brain barrier and begins altering neurotransmitter activity, primarily by enhancing the effects of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the brain's main inhibitory chemical. This dampens neural activity, leading to relaxation, slower reflexes, and a dulled sense of pain or anxiety. At the same time, alcohol reduces the effectiveness of glutamate, which normally increases brain activity and energy levels. Result? A quieting of the mind, a lull in mental chaos. That's why people feel calm, giggly, floaty, even creative. But it's not all sunshine and jazz. As the dose increases, so does the impact on memory, motor control, and emotional regulation. Too much, and it begins affecting deeper brain regions, leading to blackouts, aggression, or deep melancholy. You don't get to choose which wires it disconnects. Broken heart from connection to dependence. What starts as social lubricant can quietly morph into emotional crutch. You don't just drink to celebrate. You drink to cope. Not to toast the moment, but to escape it. And then, it becomes routine. Not a choice, but a need. Not a pleasure, but a pattern. Alcohol, like all addictive substances, doesn't just hijack pleasure circuits. It reshapes identity. The drink becomes your rhythm. Your sense of time, your mood, your rituals, all revolve around it. The irony? You started drinking to feel more like yourself. But over time, you feel less yourself without it. And maybe that's the cruelest trick. It gives you control by slowly taking it away. Balance scale the ethical weight of a sip. We rarely treat alcohol as a moral question. But maybe we should. Because every sip has consequences that ripple far beyond the glass. It affects how we treat our partners, our children, ourselves. It's behind a staggering number of domestic abuse cases, traffic deaths, and mental health crises. Governments know this. That's why alcohol is heavily taxed, why it's regulated, marketed, censored, and yet still omnipresent. Societies struggle with a paradox. We celebrate alcohol in our films, music, and social norms. But we punish those who fall victim to its pull. We want the high, but we don't want to deal with the crash. And so, we oscillate between indulgence and guilt, celebration and denial. Chart decreasing the decline of the modern drinker. Interestingly, in many parts of the world, alcohol consumption is declining among younger generations. Why? Because we've seen the damage. Because we've grown up with stories of addiction, trauma, and loss. Because the high is no longer worth the crash. Some people now choose sobriety not out of necessity, but as a statement, a reclaiming of clarity. But that doesn't mean alcohol is going away. It's too embedded, too mythic, too human. It means we're redefining our relationship with it, not through prohibition, but through awareness. We're asking better questions. Why do I drink? What am I seeking? And is there another way to find it? Milky Way, the final question. What are we really after? Let's step back. Why did humans chase fermented fruit in the jungle? Why did we build rituals, empires, and economies around a drink? Because alcohol wasn't just about pleasure. It was about transcendence. It was about briefly escaping the loneliness of the self. It was about touching something beyond reason, even if just for a moment. It gave us the illusion of flight, of rising above the mundane. It let us believe, if only for a night, that life was lighter than it seemed. And that's a very human desire. Because whether through religion, philosophy, music, or drink, we're always reaching for something bigger, something softer, something higher. Alcohol, at its best, is a whisper that says, you don't have to carry it all tonight. Just be, just feel. And at its worst, it's a trapdoor disguised as a ladder. Candle conclusion, between the sacred and the stupid. In the end, alcohol is both a tool and a test. It can unlock laughter, honesty, and connection, but it can also strip away reason, stability, and health. It has built civilizations and destroyed families. It has sparked revolutions and erased memories. It is, perhaps, the most poetic of poisons, because it doesn't just kill the body, it seduces the soul. So here's the truth. Alcohol won't save you, but it might show you who you really are when you think no one's watching. The question isn't whether to drink or not. It's whether, in your search for something more, you're willing to face what you find at the bottom of the glass. And maybe, just maybe, the most intoxicating thing isn't the drink at all. It's the search,